real legal justification for that. But these big giants have a lot of power. We have seen during the COVID that they had a lot of power to decide what is fake news and what is the truth, and I put that into brackets, because they put themselves in the sun, can count on a very docile censorship from this platform to censor everybody who is pushing a narrative which is different from the official American narrative. And we see that it happened with what happened in Syria, what happened in Gaza, what happens now in Ukraine. A lot of alternative media, of Russian media, but not only. I mean, it's really media and journalists from a lot of countries are purely censored on this platform in one click, just by a request of the American authorities. And it's a big problem because these platforms were a big hope to counter the narrative of the mainstream media. Yeah. It's really difficult for alternative media to have access to frequencies and license to be visible on TV. So most of the alternative media are only publishing on the internet, and some of them have a paper version, very few of them. So it's mainly internet, which is now the only way for people to get alternative information. So by censoring the social media, which are now a main platform for the young generation to get information, it's of course a big attempt to censor the opposite side, and it's one part of this now very big information war. And the problem is that the US have a big advance because the main, let's say, mainstream social media are on their territory and their jurisdiction. So on this point, they have a huge advantage on the other countries like Russia or China, for example.
Sure. Now that we see that some very great powers or even influential multilateral institutions are very much involved in some of these problems affecting the global world, where the media has taken, serious attention. Here we're looking at the United Nations, we're looking at NATO, and even the United States of America, among others. How do we now involve the international organizations in trying to solve this global information war that has actually led to, sometimes it keeps the broad audience in a state of confusion because of they don't know the media organ to trust in getting informed, particularly about issues which are of international concern.
The main problem is most of the international organizations, and especially the one who should defend free speech, are on the contrary supporting censorship. We have seen that with this organization known as Reporters Without Borders, which itself literally pushed to censor Russia Today France, for example. They literally pushed for that, and for me it's really amazing. So we see a complete inversion of values of these international organizations which should defend free speech, which would defend media, especially alternative small media, from censorship. On the contrary, they are pushing for this censorship. So they are now not playing their role. The UN also, we have seen nothing from the UN or from UNICEF, for example, concerning all the discrimination, but not only, which are striking the Russian journalists. There was a very huge criticism from the Russian authorities against the UNICEF, for example, because they never condemned the killing of Russian journalists in the war zone. We are now, since the beginning of the war, at more than 30 Russian journalists which were killed, and killed by the Ukrainian army, and in deliberate attacks, not speaking about the huge amount of injured colleagues. And the UNICEF has not condemned a single one. The only one they mention in their report, the one of Rostislav Zhoravyev, if I remember well, they just say that they are like sorry that it happened, that it's not good, but they are not so harsh, you know. While it's their role to, and they have a special representative for that, French woman, who is not playing her role. She's not condemning the killing of Russian journalists. But it would be another nationality from the West, then perhaps she will say something. But we have seen also that when in Ukraine they killed Gonzalo Lira, nobody said nothing about that in the West. There was no criticism against Kiev for that. There was no condemnation. So all these international organizations which are supposed to play this role, they are not playing it. We see nothing really active from the UN, from UNICEF, or from international journalist organization to really defend pluralism, free speech, and alternative media. On the contrary, they are defending the mainstream ones, and all the others, especially the Russian journalists, are counting for nothing.
Okay. And I think those are some of the points ensuring that this information war is spreading, particularly in the 21st century. I wish to welcome you, Yulia, a political scientist and founder, Global Expert Club, and of course sending forth this question directly to you. When we listen to Christelle and what Isabel highlighted earlier on about the complexities surrounding the media landscape, especially in a more contentious world, we begin to look at the place of vulnerable democracies in this global information war. So, Yulia, in your own perspective, how can a multilateral approach, be utilized to enhance this, some sort of public awareness and media literacy in nations or democracies which we think can be very susceptible or vulnerable to the global information war that is happening right now?
Well, unfortunately, now we live in a situation when nothing is really black or white, but we live in shades of gray, and it becomes more and more difficult to find the truth because it's all more about interpretations. So in the current situation, when we have the social networks, when we have the access to internet, when the information can still flow, it's more about the moral compass and trying to analyze information, taking it down to the very basic, and trying to see if what's at the core is constructive or destructive, and to compare it with own value sets. It becomes the only criteria that could be more or less valid when we want to understand if we're attempted to be brainwashed, or if the information being disseminated is true. And of course, the sources of information that are becoming difficult to trace is another big issue, because we live in the time when a lot of information is fabricated, and that could include also videos and deepfake videos, audio, and whatsoever else. So, well, having a variety of sources is essential for information to be still competitive, and for journalists to be able to function in a healthy environment with healthy competition, where good analysis or quality analysis is more valid than the way the information is presented. And I think it's hard to control the social networks. It's hard to control such things as a Telegram channel. Yet at the same time, the AI now allows for even more, let's say, sophisticated fabrications of information. So it's only the moral compass that can help navigate through that.
And what, in your own perspective, Yulia, do you think are the best practices for now sharing intelligence between nations to identify and counteract information warfare tactics effectively, especially now that it has, taken another dimension, and we see journalists being susceptible to this information warfare that is largely between countries or global powers wanting to solidify their influence over, narratives in the world?
Well, just like Christelle was just mentioning, one of the biggest problems is that it's not just in this information war, it's not just, let's say, battles between narratives, but unfortunately it also becomes all about killing the people that are trying to spread and disseminate the truth. And that is really a problem, because everyone else gets more and more afraid not to follow the mainstream. And I think this is what kills journalism to a great extent, because when people are threatened to death, of course it limits their capacities of doing the job properly.
Thank you. Isabel, welcome back. I think you may well have something to add to this topic, question, I beg your pardon, on the best practices that we can actually ensure to share information and identify and even help to counteract these warfare tactics, especially like you mentioned, particularly what is pertaining the Russia to the journalists at this particular moment?
Well, I think as journalists, other than continuing the work, we need to be resilient, like Russia and like others have found ways to, through the censorship, through the complete total attack on our free speech, on the ability to have access to information. We have to use the mediums that we can. So if you're, a journalist, you want to use multiple mediums, not just YouTube, but also Rumble, or also X, or also Telegram, and diversify that, cooperate with other journalists and other people who have the same desire. Because at the end of the day, I think there is a lot of work for all of us to do, right? So this isn't really a competition. It's more along the lines of we're working together to try to really get the information and the truth out there. And if we're able to do that, then I think that's going to go a long way. And I think what in all of this chaos that's happened in terms of being blocked and being censored and all of the terrible things that come with it, that also shows that the hegemon is really afraid of what's been going on, of what independent journalism has done. It is clearly threatened, and by being threatened, that means that we are doing our job effectively, because otherwise they wouldn't really care to attack or care to emulate what we've been doing. And I think that it really shows that more people are starting to listen, and even though it's been slow, especially in the West, with how brainwashed and propagandized people are, especially in the U.S., I think there is that little bit of hope, that a little bit of light in all of this cloud that people are seeing through that, thanks to the collective work of the people, the courage of people who have really risked a lot and who continue to risk a lot by doing this work, because Julian Assange was freed eventually, right? But it was a long process. He spent a lot of time in jail, and he is being used as an example of what can happen to you if you dare to do anything remotely close to this. People who are being raided by the FBI, who are being targeted in the UK, they're being used as examples of what could happen and what will likely happen, as I feel like the United States is clearly preparing for a more antagonistic, full-on approach and war against Russia. So I think this is only, unfortunately, the beginning of where we're headed.
and is in data, and it calls the media to be more vigilant as to understanding the narratives. Welcome, Steve Gill, the U.S. journalist and of course a political commentator as well, joining us today to make a comment on a topic for discussion that directly concerns journalists in the dispensation of their duties. Steve, I quite remember it should be last year or some months ago, where you actually shared an article where names of journalists who visited the Donbass. I actually was one of those people in the Donbass, and you yourself to abreast with the realities on the ground. And we saw articles circulating and attacking journalists as people, spreading Russian propaganda and whatever thing was, attached to it. So now, how can we ensure that today in the 21st century, we still practice real journalism that will ensure journalists not being afraid to get to the various bits in search for first-hand information to help balance the narratives coming particularly from mainstream media? Hello, Steve. Please, you're muted. Steve Gill? Please, you are muted. We cannot hear you. I think we are going to get to Steve subsequently. Yulia, you may want to answer to the question.
Yes, well, this is this exactly goes to continue the point that I was just making regarding all of the possible threats and all of the possible difficulties that journalists that try to speak the truth go through. And Fiorello was also one of the people who visited Donetsk and Donetsk People Republic. Christelle is there, so I think the ones we have here know that when you see the actual situation, you talk to the actual people on the ground, there is no way it could be faked. Otherwise, you would have had the entire DPR full of actors and actresses, right? It's just impossible to fake such things, and it's impossible to make propaganda of such a scale, right? In order to present an alternative, picture of alternative reality. So this is exactly one of the keys, and this is exactly why these journalists are targeted most, because they come to the source, they talk to the source, and they spread the the information from the ground, the vivid emotions, the opinions of the people who have literally gone through hell. So just like we see a lot of information being silenced from Gaza, it's not really on the news. It's not really discussed from from that point of view, in terms of the situation on the ground, because this is what is not beneficial for the ones running those military campaigns. So that's that's a logical. Unfortunately, that's a logical consequence of trying to speak the truth. And unfortunately, as we could see, a lot of war correspondents and journalists that come to those hot areas, they become immediate targets. And unfortunately, the bravest ones often get injured or even killed in those areas. And this is even more sad, because those are people with courage and dignity and everything that it takes to be delivering the truth from such difficult places.
Okay, thank you. Coming back to you, Steve, we are actually looking at how, this information war has, stifled the way journalists go about in the dispensation of their work to trying to check information on the ground. You were in the Donbass, and you actually saw the information that actually flooded mainstream media pertaining the conduct of presidential elections in Russia, and you want to comment to that in relation to our topic of discussion this day.
Thank you again, Clarissa. It's great to be with you and my colleagues. Never in the history of mankind has the side on the side of censorship been the good guys. And when you're censoring, when you're silencing voices, trying to tell one side of the story at the expense of truth, that is not the way that governments are transparent, that people are informed and able to make good decisions about their own futures and the future of their countries. As you point out, I was in the Donbass region with you observing elections a little over a year ago. And as Yulia pointed out, you would have had to have had literally thousands of actors at these various voting sites all over the country to portray themselves as just regular people. That's not what happened. The interesting thing is that while you and I and Yulia and others were there observing and reporting both last September and then again in March when I was there for the presidential election, I wasn't seeing CNN and NBC and Washington Post, Wall Street Journal, all the major media outlets were not covering what was going on, but they were reporting whatever they were fed as propaganda, that these were scam elections, that these were false elections. They weren't on the ground talking to people in Mariupol and Donetsk. They were listening to the propaganda and just repeating it like mindless drones, and then attacking those of us who are actually seeing it for ourselves, talking to people on the ground, not being led around with handlers to take us to who they wanted us to talk to. We were talking to anybody we wanted to and listening to them share their experiences. And yet the way the mainstream media and the Western governments were reporting it is that these were scam, fraudulent elections. Clarice, you've known me a few years. Yulia, same thing. I've been doing this about 40 years. I've embedded with UF troops in Iraq a couple of times, at Guantanamo Bay. I've been all over the world reporting events. And over 40 years in politics and journalism, I think people have got a clear understanding that I'm going to tell what I see as the truth, what I observe. I'm going to share what I believe and not be told what to say. And as you guys have known me for a couple of years, you probably know nobody really tells me what to say, much to your chagrin sometimes. But it may also explain why I have 2 ex-wives. Nobody tells me what to say.
And with all you've said, how do we now, or maybe how do state-sponsored disinformation campaigns impact the geopolitical relations between nations, especially major powers? Let's be more particular here with between the United States of America, Russia, and China.
Well, first of all, we know that India is pushing back against the restrictions that are being imposed on some of the Russian media outlets. They're saying, no, we want people to hear both sides of stories. Yeah. We saw certainly in the U.S. during the COVID pandemic that all of the media was reporting one side of the story, that you had to get your vaccines, you had to wear masks, you had to stay 6 feet away from each other, even though we now know that none of that was based on real science. Now, the media outlets were getting paid a lot of money from these pharmaceutical companies to tell one side of the story, to brand ivermectin as horse medicine, rather than recognizing that it is a long established and now embraced great treatment for not only COVID, but for other potential diseases as well. So the lies were coming from one side, and you weren't hearing both sides. So anytime I'm only hearing one side of the story, I'm going to be very, very skeptical of what's being told, because I know that we're not hearing the full truth on both sides. And again, when you've got the Iranians now hacking the Donald Trump campaign and providing that information to the Harris-Walz campaign, we know that there are foreign interests who may try to involve themselves in U.S. elections. But we should focus on those who are actually doing it, not the propaganda that the U.S. government or in the old days, Hillary Clinton using misinformation, disinformation to try and blame Russia for what she and her team were actually doing.
Thank you, Steve. I'll come back subsequently. Back to you, Christel. In your opinion, what do you think are those best strategies that nations can employ to safeguard their information environment without infringement on freedom of speech and expression?
First, I think especially the countries from the south and from the BRICS should really actively work first to develop new news agencies. I think both local and perhaps some international ones, perhaps some BRICS news agencies or something like that. That's the first point. I think it's really important to offer more possibilities for people to obtain information. The more they can obtain different point of views, the better they can build their own opinion. The second, I think, is also to think about building some new international organizations to defend the rights of journalists. When Gonzalo Lira, for example, was imprisoned in Ukraine, nobody reacted from the international instances, nobody from the international journalists organizations even tried to defend him and to try to free him. We have seen the same with Julian Assange, and I think that's a very big issue. Journalists should be really a profession which should be really defended and protected. Journalists have to stick to a very strong ethics, which are the Munich Charter, and they normally have some rights which are backed to these duties. And the problem is that now the journalists have all duties, but they have none of these rights. And that's a big problem. I think really there should be real international organizations who will really play this role of defending journalists which are victims of political repression and censorship, who can really protect them from a judiciary point of view and so on. And a third point, I think, as we see that now, like as I said a few months ago in a conference, we see now a balkanization of the internet. So we see that there is like a reflex of censoring everything which is not from our side. So we see that in China, we see that in the US, we see that also some attempts like this also in the Russian side, and I think it's a bad thing, because at the end we will end with one Russian internet, one Chinese internet, one American internet, and it's not good, especially for the circulation of information. So I think also the other countries should first work also to push and support development of alternatives to the big American tech, because for the moment they are the ones who are really dominating this market, and that's a big problem. They are almost in a situation of monopoly, and so they can do everything they want almost without any consequences, and that's a big issue. So I think there should be much more competition between, and so we should really working hard on building alternatives.
Okay.
We see now in Russia they actively work to promote VK and to develop YouTube, for example, as an alternative to YouTube, because YouTube is censoring all the Russian media, so they try to build an alternative. And I think it's good to develop such national alternative, and we should think also to develop some, let's say, neutral alternative. I say neutral with some brackets. Okay. But things like Telegram, which are, let's say, in some kind of neutral jurisdictions, will be balanced and allow to have bridges between all these different blocks of the internet, which are more and more separating from one each other.
Yes,
I think it's really important to avoid the complete balkanization of the internet by these means.
All right, thank you, Crystal. We have just 10 more minutes to be together. And this last question to you, Isabel. Now we have looked at all of these complexities and how complicated it is the media landscape is becoming in this world of heightened geopolitical contestation among major powers. Do you think it is necessary right now to engage in a more drastic or radical approach to journalism in order to counteract this information warfare, which is being masterminded by powers wanting to continue to exert their influence at every sphere of society?
Yeah, well, when we're in an age of censorship, an age where we're criminalizing speech, we're criminalizing dissent, I think it's a radical thing to just actually tell the truth. And so that is precisely the fight we're in. We're in this fight, and Russia very much, as well as any nation that's facing the United States and NATO right now in this fight from unilateralism into multilateralism. They are really in a fight, not in a military sense only, but in a fight when it comes to a psychological type of war that is being waged upon anybody that dares to think outside the State Department perspective. And the only thing you can do under these circumstances is either fold and completely give up, or just continue telling the truth. And as everybody has laid out here on the program, the only ways to do that are to really invest in new different platforms and in new alternative methods, because as my colleague just said, the United States and in the West have a huge hold on YouTube, on media, the media, social media sphere, the big tech giants, all of this. And I think that for so long, we have relied on that as being always there. But what we're seeing now is that they are shooting down the channels that counteract, counter their narrative left and right. It doesn't matter actually which side of the spectrum you fall on. Everybody is being attacked. Everybody is being attacked as if they say something, especially that they twist in favor of being of Russia or being of China or whatever is the culprit that they've decided to focus on. And so for me, I don't think it's actually radical. I think it's part of the job. But I think in this age where we're having such excessive amounts of censorship, it is going to require us to continue to not be afraid, to be steadfast in our pursuit of the truth, and not say, okay, well, this is happening to RT or this is happening to XYZ media, so I'm going to stop doing my job. I understand that people have obvious fears, where a lot of us are threatened, a lot of us are put on lists, a lot of us are in situations where we're facing very, very dangerous circumstances. But I do think that if that is your role right now in this fight, I think you should embrace it and do what you can.
Indeed, very imperative, and that is the way forward. Now, to you, Steve, still looking at the feasibility of curtailing the impact of this global information war on the peace and stability of the respective nations. What do you think can be done to ensure that this information war does not lead to more diplomatic feuds or contestation between countries of the world that will undermine, international peace and security?
Well, I think as Bella was just pointing out, we have to speak up. And again, there is some risk, and those of us who are perhaps less at risk need to speak up more loudly than those who are in more difficult situations. But I think the other thing is creativity. Shows like this, other means of getting information out, whether it's podcasts or other technology venues that are being created as we speak, those are other avenues to reach people. In the U.S., it used to be that you had, three major networks. Everybody got their news in the evening from, Walter Cronkite or one of the talking heads in one of three shows. But now there are countless other ways of getting information out. And you're looking at X. They're trying to silence Elon Musk's X in Brazil, and now he's found new ways with Starlink to make it accessible that can't be blocked as easily. So I think that creativity and pushing the technological boundaries, and then again having people that have credibility and a courage to speak truth, even when it's not necessarily pleasant, are the way that we have to combat this. And we have to. I mean, you know, in countries around the world, particularly those that are pursuing democracy and involving voters in their own destiny, you know, you only have a democracy that works if people are informed and engaged. And if they are not informed, they will not properly be engaged. And that's why our job as informing people is absolutely critical to the whole democratic process in the U.S. and around the world.
Okay, thank you. And we, of course, end with you, Yulia, and bringing us even to the historical context and even aspect of colonialism and imperialism. So the question in itself is, how do historical context of colonialism and imperialism affect the susceptibility or vulnerability of certain regions to information warfare tactics from external powers?
Well, I think aside for the classical examples of wiping out history or wiping out chapters from history books, I think there is some relevant stats coming from Rwanda. There was a research that showed that at least 10% of the victims of the genocide were due to the information disseminated by the radio. So in those villages where the radio could reach, remote villages, the genocide still took place. So this was data based on some scientific research, and 10% of the victims were due to that. So I think it's a striking example of how information can affect, especially when you again talk about the Rwandan example. The entire division of the people into Hutu and Tutsi was artificial. Yeah. I mean, it depended on the way of living they had, if they were having cattle or if they were farmers. So it's super artificial. In one family, you could have two brothers, one of whom would be Hutu and another Tutsi, and it took just several decades for propaganda to fuel things up in such a way that people took weapons and were killing each other. And that led to around 1 million of people's lives lost, and that was around 20% of the population. So Russia-Ukraine crisis is very much similar to the Rwandan genocide, not in terms of methods, but in terms of hatred being fueled and spread within just a couple of decades.
And to round up, when you listen to this, do you think there already exists an independent fact-checking organization that can curtail some of the consequences of, disinformation, misinformation, and the negative propaganda that is occupying the media space in today's world?
Well, in terms of fact-checking, you see the problem with the fake news is that it's more about interpretations. Mm-hmm. So you would always find facts, and then you will, in some cases, you do not even find lies, but it's the ways the dots are connected within the news that sometimes make it different from the truth. So sometimes you would have 5% of lies, or maybe one fake fact and a bunch of interpretations, and the rest of it would be facts. But again, even with this term, occupied regions or liberated regions, it's just the wording. It's just one little word, but it changes the whole narrative.
Absolutely. Absolutely. Thank you so much. And this is where we're going to end today's program. But I want to take this opportunity to thank you for sharing your insight on this very important topic of today that touch particularly the media involved in the dissemination of information across the globe, and how can we actually carry on with this dispensation without being tagged propagandists, or maybe with the fear of the unknown. We continue to bring to you first-hand and constructive information that seeks to change the narratives and, of course, bring a balance in the field of information and the dissemination of news and other related information that could promote globalization, international cooperation, and mitigate some of the diplomatic contestations that we face in contemporary society. Thank you, ladies and gentlemen, for your great input on today's edition. And it is on this note that I draw the curtains into today's program, Global Insight. But that's not all. Keep having a lovely moment as you follow programs on For You Media Africa. Bye-bye.